it going, everybody? So we have a fun review today as we're talking The Strangers Chapter 1. Believe it or not, if you couldn't tell by the title, this is the first chapter of a planned 3-film trilogy. That already sounds crazy enough, but then you also add in the fact that they're supposed to be releasing all 3 parts of this trilogy within the same calendar year. We'll see if that actually happens, but I remember them saying that they were going to try and release all of them in 2024. After their car breaks down in an eerie small town, a young couple are forced to spend the night in a remote cabin, where soon panic ensues as they're terrorized by 3 masked strangers. Now, I'm someone that genuinely enjoys the very first Strangers film from 2008. It's one of those films that just has the right balance of dread and realism to make it an effective horror film. Since then, however, it has been kind of odd seeing them try and shape the Strangers into this big horror franchise. Don't get me wrong, the Strangers are iconic horror characters. Even when they did The Strangers Prey at Night, I thought overall that was fine. It still is fascinating because nothing about the Strangers ever screamed big franchise potential, considering there was a lot of intentional mystery behind The Strangers. The Strangers Chapter 1 attempts to do something grander with the franchise. There are still several core ingredients present, but does still try and expand the lore, if you will, of The Strangers, taking things on a new path while in the process orchestrating a new narrative around this couple being terrorized by them that presumably is going to play out over the course of these several chapters. There's quite a lot of things about The Strangers Chapter 1 that left me torn overall. One of those rare instances where I left mostly mixed after the film than any other emotion. As somebody that's a big fan of the slasher subgenre of horror, there certainly are various moments in this that I was having a fun time with. Chapter 1 does take a little bit to get going. Easily the first 25 to 30 minutes of this movie is unfortunately kind of a slog. From the moment the Strangers eventually do kick things into high gear, you can tell that many of those moments, big elaborate set pieces, the chases and all that stuff, those type of sequences were the ones they put the most effort towards. Regardless if you're a big fan of one of the Strangers or you like all of them equally, there's a solid amount for each of them delivering carnage that felt much more in line with the tone they were going for back in The Strangers Prey at Night. As for our 2 leads in the film, with what they're given, I thought they were okay. Over time, you do buy into them as a couple since they have a good enough chemistry together. Unfortunately, a lot of the dialogue that they're given early on into that first 25-30 minutes or so, it is pretty rough. Like, we're talking cringy type of dialogue that you would expect in a bad slasher film. Essentially a lot of eye-rolling dialogue. Many people might not know this about me, but for a period of time I was a pretty big fan of Riverdale as a series. I never ended up finishing the show, it just got too off the rails by the end. Due to being a Riverdale fan for a period of time, I was very well aware of Madelaine Petsch because she was one of the characters I liked a lot on the show as Cheryl Blossom. To give credit where credit is due, I think Madelaine gives a very impressive performance. Arguably, she's the best performance of the entire film. She completely sells the terror and confusion being put in this type of situation, doing her best to try everything that she can to survive the Strangers, and really goes through the gambit trying to stay alive. In recent times, we have been deeming a lot of new horror scream queens in the genre. After Chapter 1, I wouldn't crown her officially as a new scream queen, but the potential is there. Her performance here sets a great foundation in place for her to reach that type of status. Weirdly though, and this goes back to what I was saying about the Strangers and them trying over time to make them into this big horror movie franchise, the ideas behind the Strangers, they are vastly limited. And those limitations are stretched even in Chapter 1 because a large chunk of the Strangers Chapter 1 very much feels like a rehash of the original film, just with far less suspense and dread behind it. Much like in that first Strangers film, it's just random people who are terrorized strictly because they were home, or in this case because they were here because they changed the tagline. Except in Chapter 1, they play up a lot more of the big horror cliches of the slasher subgenre. I'm not even someone that's against using the horror cliches. If they're done well, I don't really mind them, but I don't think they're done to their best effect in Chapter 1. Using a lot more of the more frustrating ones, packing on the multitude of jump scares. Some of the characters in this movie make some horribly dumb decisions. I get the need for dumb decisions in these movies, but some of the ones in here, I was losing my mind, and not in a good way. There certainly are moments of carnage to get excited over in this. In a similar vein to Prey at Night, it lacks a lot of the elements that made that original Strangers movie so frightening. A big part of what made the Strangers so frightening in the first place was the realism aspect, the fact that they're so mysterious. We know nothing about them. So I wasn't entirely clamoring for a more of an origin behind the characters. Of course, that is a personal opinion. I'm sure there are people out there that want to learn more of the backstory behind the characters. For me, I think it kind of ruins some of the mystique, knowing and learning the backstories of these characters, and why they do what they do. I also have to imagine a majority of the people going into The Strangers Chapter 1 is well aware that it is a first part of a planned trilogy, so you already have this preconceived notion going in that the stakes aren't going to be overly high, because you know the story isn't going to end here. We have to set up potential sequels, which they definitely do. It's definitely left in such a way to tease the next upcoming film with its cliffhanger ending, which for the most part, the cliffhanger ending was fine. The best way I guess you could describe the cliffhanger ending and the mid-credits scene is it was kind of predictable. I guess I'm intrigued to see where it goes in Chapter 2. The Strangers Chapter 1 definitely is a mixed experience overall. The Strangers do have several solid moments that I think fans of those characters will appreciate, but I do think it lacks a lot of the charm that made that original Strangers film so iconic. It's as I said, I'm torn on it because there's certainly elements I think are strong, but I think there's just as many moments that are in the negative portion where it kind of is a counterbalance. I am very intrigued on how audiences are going to receive The Strangers Chapter 1. Once you do get a chance to check out The Strangers Chapter 1 in theaters this week, I'd love to know your thoughts down below. What did you think of the film? Did you like the film? Did you not like the film? Share all your thoughts down below. And are you looking forward to Chapter 2 after this as well? Thank you guys, as always, checking out the videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you update reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. But next time, I'll see you guys later.